Hello and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today we're going to be talking about policies.
Super exciting stuff.
Well, we'll also be
Shantanu has
doing some
already been in chat complaining about how our title has made them bored.
yes. Well, we will be showing you some terminal-y things too. Today we're going to be doing user management, but I think we're kind of making a slight change to how we kind of normally do things. But so we'll do the critical path kind of as normal, and then we'll talk into like what policy episodes should look like once we transition to the deeper dive after the critical path. So Nate,
Yeah.
um, let's jump into the terminal and we can
That's
see
a wonderful plan.
what happens. Oh wait, we had something happen, right? A user left our organization.
Yeah. And now we have to make sure that that user's access gets revoked, at least from a Linux side, right? So we're going to go through just an example of kind of some best practices on making sure that the user can't get back into the system, making sure that all their stuff is cleaned up, and of course, making sure that you have backups of that stuff in case you need it, right? So first of all, we have the user leaving because again, me and my creative naming mechanisms is John Doe. So the user JDoe is the one who's left the organization. Now, if I did an ID on JDoe, you'll see JDoe has an account. They're part of a supplemental group, and at the moment, that's as much as I know about them because a good sysadmin probably doesn't remember every single user on every single system, but your Linux systems will be able to tell you a whole lot about these users. And that's part of what I'm going to go into in the critical path here, right? So I'm going to tell you that you probably want to jot down this user ID because at one point after you've deleted the user, the system no longer knows who JDoe is. But lingering files that have that ID associated with them will still have the same ID associated with them. And you're going to have to make sure that those things get cleaned up, right? And you'll see an example of that as we get toward the end of this after we've deleted the user. So first of all, a good first step is at the moment that this user is no longer employed by the company or whatever, they've been terminated or they've left on good terms, doesn't matter. The first thing you should do is lock the user account. Now, you could do this via a scheduled job, for example, maybe at 5 p.m. on that person's last day. It just happens. That way, no one has to remember to make this a thing. But usermod has a -L option, which is lock, and then you just give it the username of the person, right? So we do that. And now what that does is it makes it so the user cannot connect to the system anymore. Their account goes into lockout mode, which I think if we were to look at Etsy Shadow, we should now. No, I guess not. It must lock it in some other way. I thought it would put the bang bang in here, but it doesn't. It's retaining the password. It's locking it via other metadata along with the account.
Oh,
So the accounts.
it put an exclamation point at the beginning of the.
Oh, I guess you are right. It put an exclamation point at the beginning of it, which the other user accounts do not. So there you go. That's how it does it. It puts the exclamation point, which basically means the password won't work, right? Like you try to connect to that account, it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to connect to that account. I don't know if root can root still like could I still su dash over to
Yeah, because you're not
Yeah,
authenticating.
exactly. Because as root, I can do that sort of thing. Okay. So the account is locked out. The other thing that you may want to consider is checking to see if that account had any SSH keys and move or remove those as well. This user did not, but you would find them inside of a hidden subdirectory inside of the user's home directory called .ssh. And I can show you on root here. Oh, no, I guess root doesn't have any either. One of the accounts on here, maybe RHEL does. Nope. I thought I had an account here that had SSH keys, but you'll find it inside of a hidden subdirectory called .ssh. It's a file in there called authorized_keys. And if you just rename that file or empty the file out or delete the file, now that user's SSH keys aren't going to work anymore either. Okay, let's move on. The next thing we want to see, now that the account's locked out, we know nobody can connect to it. Let's see if that user has any files on this system that are owned by them. So we're going to use find. And if you remember, we had an episode a couple episodes back about all these trick things we can do with find. This was one of them, right? So remember that. So all this is going to do is find it and show us things that exist owned by this user. So I can tell you right now that this user has mail waiting for them. Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. Depends on the purpose of the system. Usually that's just system notifications and stuff that have come to the user. Uh, they've got a cron job. They've set up cron, right? You var spool cron jdo means that there's a cron job that runs as this user. And of course, here's their home directory, right? That's something we'd expect to find. You can see there's a bin subdirectory with a shell script in there. That's important to note because things running out of people's home directories is exactly how that thing that always just worked suddenly stops working when Joe leaves the or when John leaves the organization, right? And then of course we have a shared directory /shared. There's a subdirectory called jdo. Maybe this is some shared user structure. Maybe it's a volume that's mapped in that has shared home directories on it, whatever. It's just an example here. You can see that inside of shared, we have a jdo subdirectory, and there's a file inside of there called businessy. So there's probably super businessy stuff in there.
So before you move on, one quick thing. I like that you used find, because I think typically when people think about users, they think about one location in their file system.
Their home directory.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you know, when we start talking about things like backing up somebody's stuff or whatever it is we're going to do with the user's data, everyone focuses on home directory. But
Right.
using find, you found that there were all these files elsewhere on the machine, shared directory, var spool mail and cron. So using find lets you find all of that stuff too.
Right. Right. That it does. Now, the next thing that we can do with that data is you could lovingly handcraft a tar archive out of all that data, because you probably want to back up what this user had on the system just in case, right? There could be cases where they had stored some data, and if you just blindly delete it a month from now, you'd be like, man, John was the expert on that thing, and I don't know anything about it anymore. But maybe he had like documentation in his home directory, or maybe that shell script there was something really important. You can also use find and use the exec flag to append a tar archive with all the stuff that it finds. And I looked that up and made sure I got the right syntax before the show today. If we do a find pointed at the root, look for user jdo, the same thing we did just before, but now we add an exec flag that uses tar with the right command line options to make a tar archive out of every file it finds. We hit that, and there you go. You can see a bunch of outputs saying it's removing, deleting the slash from file names. And now if I do an ls-l, for example, there we go. We have a tar archive of jdo. Now if I were to like make a temp directory here, go in there, xf./jdo, we should get all of jdo's stuff, right? You can see there's var, and you should find spool inside of there, and there's cron, right? So there's that cron tab that we said jdo was running. There's his home directory, right? There's that shared directory with jdo inside of it with his businessy file. So everything that you needed, everything that jdo owned is now inside of this tar archive. And now at this point, we can feel pretty safe that we can probably start doing things like removing jdo. But there is one more thing I suggest you check, and that is, did jdo have any sudo rules? Because they do not get automatically cleaned up when you remove jdo, right? And that may never be a problem, but you'll have this lingering sudo rule in there for a user that doesn't exist anymore. And if a new user named jdo ever gets created, which by the way, could be something that you put into your user management policy. We never reuse usernames. If you did, and all of a sudden another jdo, maybe a Jane Doe, starts with your company, and they get the same username because your naming convention would have named her jdo the same as John Doe was. She'd all of a sudden have the same sudo rule because it matches the username, right? So there's a subcommand for sudo called sudo-l. That if you're a user and you do sudo-l, it'll show you all the sudo commands you're allowed to run. If I'm a different user, like root, for example, I can pass the -u flag to sudo and say, run sudo as this other user, and then do -l, right? So what this is going to tell me is, look at that. JDO is allowed to run ls as root. Why ls? I don't know. It was an example that I put in there. But the point is, now I can go look through sudoers and figure out why does JDO, what rule allows JDO to run ls. So if I just went to etc sudoers, I'll find that inside of there, there's a sub directory, there's a sub file. It's a file in the directory called JDO, and inside of there is a rule for JDO allowing them to run ls. Now, this could be inside of etc sudoers, in which case you could just cat etc sudoers, and you could find it in there. You could even use grep, just grep in etc for JDO as a search term. You could grep just the sudoers file, whatever, however you want to try to find this. But the point is, you've got a rule you have to track down and get it cleaned out. I don't know if there's a clean way to just ask sudo, tell me everything JDO can do and how they get the grant, but that might be something to look into as well. All right, so I'm going to remove that. sudoers.djdo, because Joe not going to work here anymore. And then we're going to remove JDO. Let's clear the screen so you guys can see better. So there's two ways to do userdel to clean up JDO. You could just do userdel JDO. And what that does is it'll delete the user entry for JDO, but leave the file structure in place. If that's your procedure, then fine, you can do that. But I can tell you what that's going to lead to is a lot of cruft inside of home. If you've already made an archive of the files like we did earlier in the critical path here, then I would suggest you use userdel-r and then the username for JDO. So give me just a sec here. We're going to paste that in there. Userdel-r tells userdel, yes, delete their home directory as well as the user, right? And that's probably good practice as long as you've made a backup of that. Now, if I did an ID on JDO, it's going to tell me that JDO doesn't exist. I don't know who that guy is anymore. If I look at home, the JDO user directory is no longer there. Does it remove cron? Let's find out. It did not remove the cron file for JDO. So that's something you're going to want to clean up.
Yeah, it only removes stuff in home.
I don't want to remove all of cron.
At your mail,
right?
Those are things you would have to account for separately.
Right. So the other handy thing there would be we can use find to find everything that's owned by JDO again, and this time tell it to delete them.
Well, you've already removed the user though, so nothing's going to be owned by JDO anymore.
Yeah, right? This is my example that I alluded to earlier. So you might remember we deleted John Doe already. John Doe doesn't exist on the system anymore. Do we have John Doe's user ID? I didn't jot it down, but I think it was like 1014 or 1013. Actually, here's what we can do.
You could do it, yeah.
Remember that
cron
on that? Well, on the shared directory. There we go. 1012 is his user ID. So that first column there, that's his user ID, and that's the group ID that owns it. So if we do the same find command, and it'll take the user ID, the number, as well as the user ID name. So we do 1012.
Before you do that, I
already did it. What's the matter?
Well, he's got all this stuff in shared. Maybe that's shared with other team members, and you've now just deleted a bunch of stuff that is important to their team. But thankfully, you have a tar archive, and you can
thankfully I have a tar archive.
The other thing I would probably have done instead of trying to like look up JDO's user, I would have just used find with no user, the -no user option, because that's going to
there you go.
Don't have a user owner, including the JDO files that we now have that aren't owned by a user account.
And that could be a good thing to do periodically anyway, because if you have files that are not owned by a user and they got missed by some other cleanup job, that'll help you find those too. which could be catastrophic or could be great. So pay attention to what you're deleting. All right. The only other thing, remember, JDO was part of a supplemental group. If we do so let me clear the screen again here. What was it? Group mems dash G, and then what was it? Some users dash, I think it was capital L, or maybe it's just dash L. Okay. So what that would do is it would tell you who's a member of this group, right? In this case, it's empty because JDO was the only one. Let's use, I don't know, wheel as an example. You can see that if I look up wheel, it tells me that RHEL is a member of wheel. I knew that was going to be true because we do that on these lab environments. So some users is now empty. So we could make a decision at this point. Does some users need to stay here because the next time we hire someone to replace JDO, do they get added to the some users group? Or is some users a group that was specific to JDO for some reason and we should now delete it? So this is a thing that's hard to do automatically unless you have some context around why was JDO part of that group and should that group persist anymore or not, right? So if you were going to remove it, it's group del, isn't it? Is the command. I didn't jot this one down. But group del and then the name of the group. We'll delete the group. And that's, I think, it. We've successfully cleaned up JDO. Did I miss anything? Anything good that people in chat were bringing up?
Oh, they were all making fun of you for deleting the files without checking them first.
Oh, well, I'm a very cautious systems administrator in all my lab environments that have zero meaning to me.
We talked about this being a local user. A lot of companies and organizations will use a larger method for managing their
Yes.
user accounts, right? Something like Active Directory or LDAP. So we showed you how to manage individual user accounts on individual boxes, but realize that the same things, like the user left, what do we do? How do we find their files? What do we do to archive them? All those same questions still need to be answered, even if you're using a central authentication model.
Right.
So,
Shantanu brought up a good suggestion: running processes for JDO. Was there anything running in memory for JDO? And we didn't check.
we did not check, but you could PSAUX pipe into grep 1012 now, because that would be what they're running as now.
There shouldn't be anything. Oh, there's just the grep that's running.
Yeah.
So,
which,
yeah.
by the way, quick command line tip. If you recall that previous command, and you put the 1 in 1012 in square brackets.
Just the 1, okay?
Yep.
Oh yeah, now it'll say things that start with 1012, right? Or
well, this will be the same thing. It'll find things that contain 1012, but the grep no longer shows up because the grep is square bracket 1 square bracket 012.
Right.
So it doesn't match the regular expression anymore.
I actually ran across this while setting up a challenge. Ooh, should we tease people? If anybody's coming to Summit, there's a cool technical challenge that'll be happening at the Summit booth. And I learned about that exact thing that Scott just brought up because in one of the tests that I had to do to make sure a process was not running anymore, I kept running into a problem where grep was messing up my check.
All right. Don't forget to mash that like and subscribe button. We're going to transition into our deeper discussion about user policies and user management things. So
only 20 minutes in.
That's right. Stay with us. All right. So all the things that we showed you are a whole bunch of tactical tasks that one would perform when doing management of a user.
Right.
But Nate, that was only users leaving.
We can certainly talk a whole lot about users being created too.
Yep. And then it also doesn't cover things like, what if somebody loses their password? How do they get that thing reset? So this is where the policy piece comes into play. So that you can have standard ways of handling these situations. And because you've written it down in a policy, other people also know the standard ways that they are supposed to handle these situations.
Yeah,
So,
what if you're on vacation and you're the one that usually adds users, right?
right.
Someone needs to add those users.
I mean, I guess they're not working until you get back. Maybe that's the
Yeah, their start date has to be set around when you return from vacation. That's all there is to it.
or someone leaves on not good terms and you're on vacation and it needs to happen now. So
Yeah,
if the only person that knew how to do that, you'd be getting that call because it had to happen now.
right, right.
Uh,
And Scott sort of already started alluding to this during the critical path, but a big thing to think about is, are you even the one that's responsible for this, right? You, as the systems administrator, is there some other group within your organization that is responsible for deciding how users get named, how they get added, how they get removed, right? If that's the case, then obviously don't bother wasting time. Just refer to their policy, right? You don't want to have your own policy that conflicts with central ITs or central organizations like identity group. There could be identity people, there could be information security people that make calls on how these things are supposed to operate. And you don't want to be conflicting with their standards. You want to try to match those as best you can.
yeah, or and sometimes you have to work with those teams because you need to know how to
Right,
implement, right? So, for example, Nate, in our critical path, you remove JDOS files after making a tar archive.
right.
How long do you keep that tar archive?
Exactly.
So, they,
Is J Doe leaving because of some legal action?
well,
And if so, do you have to treat those files differently?
right, and so here at Red Hat, our legal team provides us our document retention policy, our data retention policy, and it says you will have this data for however long. And as Nate alluded to, like if this person was involved in some kind of litigation, because
Hmm.
sometimes that happens, um, the document retention may be different. I will tell you that if you remove things and it's for someone who's involved or your company is involved in litigation and you remove data, whoever is the judge of that case is going to be very unhappy that you remove data that could have been used for some,
Yes.
whether that's for your case or against your case, like, but the fact that it was removed, they're going to be really unhappy about that. Now, if
And
the
that
request,
could even lead to suspicion, right? And that's the last thing you want.
so when you're building these things, you need to think about that kind of stuff. The other thing that I had happen to me once was I worked in a national laboratory, and we'd have people that came to work at the laboratory, and they were researchers, and they had years of doing research in this specific thing, and they would come and they'd work at the lab and would be doing their research, and then they'd leave the lab and they'd go do their research somewhere else. Um, but sometimes years later they'd contact us and go, "Hey, I worked there 7 years ago and I left some data. And now that data is important to me for something that I'm doing now in my research." Um, and they would be very unhappy when we told them that they couldn't have that data anymore because it had been removed from the system. Uh,
Right.
so because of that, like that laboratory had special requirements for like if this person is a researcher or an analyst or other stuff, their documents were retained differently than say IT system administrator documents, um, because of not wanting to like have people lose things that need to be recreated that may be difficult to do. But then also the like, if somebody asks you 7 years later, should you give them that data?
Yeah.
That's
Right.
another have to be addressed,
That's
right?
kind of exactly what I was going to lead into next, right? How responsible are you for maintaining that data for that user? Now, in the case of, a lab where they're doing research, maybe that's a different context, right? But if someone came to me 7 years after they left and said, "Where's the research I did when I was there 7 years ago?" I would probably just say, how on earth did you expect me to know to save that for you? You
Right.
know?
Uh, yeah. So at the time, the retention policy had been, I think, 3 years. So when that
Right.
person called 7 years later, they were very sad. Um,
Right.
we were like, oh, we hold on to things for 3 years, and this is well past that.
But it's
Uh,
important to have that policy, especially in a legal world, right? If your legal retention policy says we hold on to things for 30 days and on 31 days there's legal action, then you can legally say our retention policy says we delete that at 30 days and it's gone. And
right.
then they
That's
can't come back to you and say, "Well, why did you delete that incriminating data?" Well, because our retention policy said we only keep it for 30 days and we didn't know it was incriminating,
right.
right?
And that's so before the show, I started to make some documentation, which is, I know every system administrator, every technology professional loves making documentation.
Yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
we talked about this before the show, Scott. Systems administration is sometimes boring, and you could argue that if you're doing it right, it's almost always boring.
Indeed. So when you're choosing these things, writing it down is important, right? And so you can see I started to put together my standard operating procedures for user management for businessy business.
Businessy
And so I
business.
start off with a purpose. This document is for this reason. And it also included some stuff like this is who you should contact. If things need to be made exceptions, this is the process through which exceptions are made. And then I just kind of like started with what are people doing? What are like the normal things that we should expect, right? So people, if somebody is joining our organization. Okay, if somebody's joining our organization, I need to assign them a username. Well, here's how I'm going to choose what their username is. I need to assign them a password. So here's how I'm going to choose what their password is, right? It'll be a random 12 character thing. Here's even a command that will make you a random 12 character thing. And I'm going to force it to be changed upon first login. And here's how you force a change upon first login. And then you have to tell the person about their thing, right? So how do I tell the person about their thing? And I like to provide a email template, right? So like I can literally copy and paste it, and that way I can update the pieces that need to be updated. But if another person on my team is adding users, they can copy and paste it, right? So like it gives this standardized way of approaching stuff.
Right.
All right. And then I have stubs for like some of the other things that we were talking about. But the other thing I like doing with my SOPs is making them public within my organization. So if somebody has a question like, I want a service account, right? A user account that is not actually owned by a user. It's just like, printers is the name of the user account. And 27 people are going to be logging in and doing things as that user account. That's a big no-no for security policies generally. And so I might have a section of my standard operating procedures that says there are no non-user specific user accounts, period. That way, if somebody's like, I want a non-user specific user account, I go, nope, sorry, that's not in the standard operating procedures. Here's my document where that standard operating procedure is documented. And at the beginning of the document, it said, if there needs to be an exception, this is how one pursues it. So if they really cared to try, they can try and like get an exception for their thing on why they need to have a non-user owned user account. I already told them like how they can pursue exceptions and who is responsible for approving exceptions, etc. But having a public one, that way you can just easily reference it. If somebody's curious about something, you can send it to them. And then there's no mystery on why things are being chosen the way they are, why decisions are being made the way they are, because it's all written down and you can give them the document. So
So
Nick,
I'm reading through some chat. There's some conversations about accounts and service accounts, and I don't know that they're directly related to what you're talking about, except that you're talking about accounts. So,
I was talking about service accounts. Like,
okay, I was too busy reading then and missed it.
yeah, Disastig, for example, says no service accounts. or I should say no log-inable service accounts. So things like the Apache user,
Right.
the
Right.
HTTP daemon, that's okay. But you can't just have like, I don't know, user three, and user three can log in with a password and do stuff because user
Right.
three is not a person. And if there's a problem where user three is misbehaving, I don't know how to find that person. Um, and that's why it's critical for security stuff. Accountability, right? So you know who's doing the thing. All right. So Nate, some other things that we could think about for our document retention policy. We talked about data retention. Um, we talked about, oh, we did talk about password policies.
No, we
Password.
didn't. There is a conversation that I just wanted to kind of bring up that's going on in chat about documentation making you expendable. And I just kind of wanted to address that in stream, right? And I don't know how serious Shantanu is about this, but Shantanu brought it up, so here we go. I would argue that if not documenting how you do things makes you less expendable, then you're not actually a valuable employee. I'm sorry to say that, but your quality of work, the experience that you bring to the role should be what makes you a valuable employee, not gatekeeping how to do things. Because gatekeeping how to do things is exactly how you end up getting called when you're in the Bahamas on vacation because they forgot how to do a thing. So don't be that admin. I understand, believe me, I understand how it can feel good to be the one that everybody has to come to for that job because it makes you feel valuable. But the alternative is worse. I think the alternative is worse.
Yeah, and I worked at a place where there was another admin. His name was Sean, who predated me. Like he didn't work there when I worked there, and
Right.
I would occasionally run across really weird things, and I like highlight it, be like, I found this thing in our population. They'd be like, oh, that was Sean. And I was like, what? Tell me about the Sean guy. And they're like, he's a lone wolf. He just ran off and did things. And he did
Right.
them. He wanted to do them. He didn't document any of them. And we just like ran into these random things because that's the decision that was made by Sean. Um, so the fact that I know Sean, even though I never worked with him, is telling. The other thing is, uh, think, documentation making you expendable, I think, is not entirely accurate because there's also like how long things take, and when you're an expert, you do things very quickly, and if you write them
Right.
down, you can actually get other people to do them, which is great, leading you to be able to apply your expertise in other places.
Right.
The other thing is what happens if you leave, and I've seen this a bunch of places too, where the person who did all the things didn't document anything, and then they left. And the new person who was hired in had to figure out how all the things worked. And that meant that every time something happened, like a user account needed to be created, they would have to do hours and hours of research on the existing infrastructure to figure out what's actually required to perform that task. And that's for something as silly as like adding a user.
Yeah.
Um,
And I've had to do those things. And sometimes it can be exhilarating, like a little treasure hunt that you're on, right? But if it's impeding how you get the job done, then even if you're enjoying the hunt, right, it's still wasting time and money for the business you work for.
well, in a like longer reaching thing, um, as it is become apparent that everything was not documented and everything kind of hinged on that one person doing all the things and no one else knows how to do the things, how do you think that employer's opinion of that person is
Right.
after they leave,
Right. Right.
right? Because they left them in a bad space where they couldn't recover easily from that person leaving. Or what do you think the user or the person who's hired to replace them, um, do you think they're going to want to work with the person who left before them and left them that like pile of undocumented, unmaintainable stuff? Our industry is surprisingly small, especially in like local labor markets. So
Yeah.
I know a good amount of the Linux administrators in my area. And so, like, if I walked in and somebody was like, "Hey, we're about to hire this guy named Sean. What do you think?" I'd be like, "Sean that worked at this other place? Yeah, hard pass."
No, don't hire Sean.
But like, if you leave your stuff in a good situation, and who comes in after you is able to get going, and you keep your reputation with your previous employer and the employees at the previous employer, like all of a sudden you're a great person to work with and you'll be recommended for things.
All right, so you were about to talk about password policy before I completely derailed you.
Yes. All right. So Nate, I'm going to bring up my screen share here because I'm going to show. Oh, I would actually have to share my screen. 1 second.
Did you turn off your share on accident?
Well, I turned off because I didn't want to share the document anymore. But
oh, that's right. You switched.
Right.
Now, an important note, right? Before you start talking about password policy, there's some really good guidance online from places like NIST or even places like compliance policies like CIS and things like that that can help you get a good start on password policy. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can if you want to. Maybe your password policy is better than all of theirs. Or maybe you just start with theirs and you're just fine.
Exactly. So you alluded to this earlier. You showed Etsy Shadow. And I have this regular unprivileged user account here, RHEL, and their password. That's their encrypted password. And the format is that the beginning part is the encryption algorithm that's used, and then the salt, and then the actual encrypted string once the salt is applied using that algorithm.
Fun fact, you can use OpenSSL to generate these. So if you ever needed to like pre-populate a user account with a generated password, you can pipe it through, or can you pipe it? I think you can use STDN, or you can just do OpenSSL password, PASSWD, and a -6, which tells it to do that algorithm. And then it'll ask you for a password and give you the string on the outside.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can also do like user add -p with this big string that'll assign that exact string as their password.
Yep.
I tend to like pipe a password into password using -- standard input.
Because somebody likes plain text passwords.
Well, yeah, because I have to send the user an email with their plain text password so they can log in for the first time. Anyway, what I wanted to show is this like extra information here. So the extra information is things like the day on which their password was last changed in the number of days that elapsed since January 1st, 1970. So this password was last changed 20,217 days since January 1st, 1970. You get the minimum number of days they're required to keep a password. So this person can change it whenever they want. They don't have to keep it for a certain period of time. The maximum number of days they can keep the password, which is 99,999 days, which essentially makes it infinite. 7 days in advance of that expiration, they will be warned that their password is about to expire. And then the last two fields, one is the date on which their their account expires. So their account will just automatically not be able to be used after that date. And the other one, I've forgotten. And the trailing field on the end doesn't actually have anything in it. But you can look at it in Man5 Shadow. It actually goes through all these things, right? Login name, encrypted password, date of last password change, minimum password date, maximum. And down here, password inactivity period. So if their password is expired, you can give them essentially a grace period where they can still log in, but it'll automatically launch them into a dialog to change their password during that period. And then the account expiration and the trailing field is nothing. All right. So, Nate, the way we work with this is, well, we could go in and manually edit it, I guess.
That sounds like an awesome way to get that done.
Yeah.
Totally not error prone either.
No. especially because I'm an expert at calculating days that have elapsed since January 1st, 1970.
Yes, I can just do that in my head.
Exactly.
So chage, right? CHAGE, isn't that the command you're looking for?
Change. So change is about changing the password aging policies for a user, changing the age of a user. And so it uses those fields in Etsy Shadow and then builds you this like human-friendly report. And then you also use change for making adjustments to it as root. So for example, if I want to set their expiration date to be tomorrow, right? So right here, their account now expires tomorrow. And if I look at their entry in Etsy Shadow, right, there's now this data populated in here. That's the date on which their password will, or their account will expire in the number of days that will last since January 1st, 1970. But one other one I use a lot is setting the date of last password change to 0.
Forcing them to change the password again, right?
Yeah. All right. So what I did was I changed this first field, which was like 20,000 something, 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 the date of their last password change to 0. And that means when they log in, they're forced to set a new password, right? So if I just SSH RHEL at localhost and I type in my password, right? You are required to change your password immediately because of the administrator doing this to you. So you type in your current password, your new password again, and that makes everything okay again. Because it replaces that 0 with the date of last password change, which is today. So it'll fix the field for you automatically. What else? So the other thing is, how do these things get set initially?
Oh, in the chat, Aaron asks, is that different from the password -e username command? I think that's for expiring the password.
Let's see.
I always use change to do it. I don't know what. Right there, expire. This is a quick way to expire a password.
Oh, interesting. Let's see.
I guess it's the same. True Linux methodology is giving you 28 ways to do the same thing.
All right. So I just set the person's password. Grep. All right. So now we have a non-zero value there. So if we do a password -e, oh, it does the exact same thing.
There you go. So 2 ways to get the same thing done.
Yep.
That might even be quicker because it's just a single flag instead of putting in, a flag and a value. Yeah.
The other place where we can go to find some of the defaults for these, Etsy login.defs. So this is like when I add a new account to my machine, what happens? So for example, you get a varspool mail file because right here it says this is where you should get your mail directory created. But there's also right here.
Default UMask.
Yep, default UMask, and then right down here, this is our password aging policy settings. So by default, passwords do not expire because they expire every 99,999 days, which we will not be here when that happens.
Are you sure? What if this server is really long-lived?
Oh, no, the server may be here. I will not be here. The past min days, right? So they have to keep their password a certain amount of days before they can change it again. The warning days, so their password expired, or it's about to expire. When they log in, we will start warning them 7 days in advance their password is about to expire. And then there's one more that's not set by default, which is pass min len. That's your password minimum length requirement. And that's another thing that can go into your SOP. Like, what is your password length or strength requirements? And there
Yeah,
are
and
ways that you can enforce that.
I don't know that we have time to go into it today, but there's also a whole other rabbit hole you could dive into about password complexity.
Yeah, that's actually what the minlen is
Well,
password.
there's more, or is len physically just the number of characters, but then there's also like scoring based on
Yes,
complexity that
yes.
can
So
get complicated.
we use the word length and scoring interchangeably. And
Okay,
so you're thinking about in the PAM configuration where you set values for an uppercase character is worth a certain amount of
right,
points and a lowercase is worth a certain
right.
amount of points. Other characters. And so that's actually contributing to the length of the password, which is really the sophistication of the password.
Rick
Uh,
has helped us out and calculated how many days that is. What is it? 99,999, and it's
yep.
approximately 273 years.
Yep. And like I said, I will not be here. I will not work here anymore.
The RHEL life cycle only allows for 10 years unless you extend that with another 2 or 4, right? So if your server is still living and you haven't changed your password in 273 years, you've got a lot of problems going on there. Plus probably a vampire working for you.
Look, Nate, I have faith because our servers are going to be walled up in some closet. Somebody's going to put some drywall over the closet door, and nobody's going to know that there's a whole machine room in there
There
clicking
we
away.
go. Why does
Until
this
somebody,
wall hum?
what are all these devices on the network that I can't physically find? Because it has happened. All right. What else should we talk about? Oh, Sudo. I actually liked in your critical path, Nate, you added essentially a cartridge for your Sudo rules for that person.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really nice solution.
Well, I mean, it's the cleanest way to get it done, but it's also not, I would say it's probably not the most common way that people do it. Commonly, people are used to just putting stuff inside of Etsy sudoers, which can turn into a big mess, which is why I like those drop-ins.
Yeah. My one question would be sometimes people belong to a sudoers group,
Hmm.
right? And then you reference the group in your sudo rules to allow them to do things. Um, do you add them to the group in their file, or is there another file that has the group definition in it that you have to worry about?
Yeah, well, I guess it would depend, right? I would if I was adding a pseudo definition for a group, I would probably not have one for the user. I would have one for the group. Or maybe have one for the purpose that it's trying to serve. Like this is for my web team, for example, or something like that.
I was thinking about the fact that you can define groups in sudo itself. That's not a system group, but maybe that's
Oh,
the
I see
thing.
what you mean.
I
I
should
don't know
use
if I
system
would
groups instead.
I would just use system groups because that's so much easier to manage than trying to keep track of another layer of groups inside of sudoers.
Mm. uh, I see Rick talks about Leap, which is an in-place upgrade, so you can keep your same stuff in
There you
place and just
go.
using it. Uh, so RHEL 10 is out soon. You can upgrade all those RHEL 9 boxes to RHEL 10 and just move them. And you'll notice that I asked Nate about sudo because everyone knows from past into the terminal history that I am terrible, like beyond terrible at sudo rules.
Pseudo rules are one of those things that you figure it out that first time and then you copy and paste it from then on because it was so hard to figure out the first time. That's my experience anyway.
I can assure you that I have not figured it out the first time. All right. Tech Pros YT asked, tell me about the difference between auth select and auth config. I don't know.
I think one of them is deprecated, isn't it? I could be wrong about that. I thought one was the older tool and one was the newer tool, but I could be misremembering. We have a TAM in the audience. Rick, go look this up.
Well, my box only has auth select, so
Yeah, I think auth config was like a RHEL 5 or 6 tool, and auth select replaced it. I could be wrong.
I think that's what I want. Yeah, and there's been a bunch of different ways over the years to make changes to your PAM configuration and add different different backends. So it does the PAM configuration for you rather than you editing your PAM configuration, which is a
Right.
recipe that will make you cry.
Yeah.
It's all SE Linux policy so far. Oh, and
I'm
there's
just
the Python.
imagining Rick furiously looking this up right now, or yelling at me for calling him out.
That's a lot. Yeah, I don't see anything super specific. There's OS build, which is actually image builder that builds system images. Python. Yeah, I don't see auth config in there, so maybe it's not there anymore.
So Rick has finally responded. Good job, Rick. Looks like auth select replaced auth config in RHEL 8.
There you go. All right. So we're getting, I think, kind of our prepared remarks, although a lot of it was not prepared.
So you had a comment about lost passwords and what to do about that. Cockpit access and key-based / certificate authentication. Like, these are all things that, like, I touched on the key-based authentication during the critical path. That's just SSH keys, right? How do you handle getting them in place? How do you handle getting them from the user, having the user generate them? It's a thing you should think about, right? Because that's the thing that the user should really generate, because they're going to set a password. They better set a password on that key, right? In case that key ever gets lost. And you're going to want them to do that instead of you making it for them, because it's just the right way to get it done. Certificate authentication, I've never actually poked at, but I know it's possible. Like, you can actually use certificates instead of SSH keys. And lost passwords. I mean, this is a thing that can happen. I forgot my password. How do I get it back? And if you're running a system that does not have a central way of managing passwords, right? Which, if it does, there's probably a lost password mechanism that you can pretty easily deal with, right? But if I've lost my password and these are like physically like local user accounts, then you probably have to work with an administrator, and you're going to want to do things like verify that the person you're talking to is actually the person they say they are. And that's going to require some exchange of information based on something that only they will be able to answer. Maybe it's something about their employment. Maybe it's something about, them according to their employee record, things like that. And we didn't even touch on stuff like, if you had a multi-factor key, like say you have a YubiKey and that falls down a drainage ditch somewhere, and how do you get those replaced? How do you verify that the user is who they say they are? Stuff like that. Another thing you're going to want to work into your policy, which we don't exactly have demos for, but things you're going to want to think about if you are developing a policy for these things.
Yeah, at one place that I have worked, a user puts in their password request via ticketing system,
Mm-hmm.
and then we contact their manager and go, "Hey, we received this thing for the user. Is this legitimate?" And then they have to go to the person and be like, "Hey, did you ask to change your password?" Okay, cool. That way, like, we're validating with another known human that their known human had actually put in the change.
Right. Because the number of, social engineering attacks that have originated from, I forgot my password. Can you please help me out? I'm in the middle of a really important business transaction. There's a reason phishing works. And it's because people want to help people out. But if you've got a policy that says, no, you have to go through these checks, and those checks are as, surefire as possible, then if someone still manages to get around them, at least you, as the administrator that may have just cost the company a bunch of money or something, can say, no, I followed the policy. Maybe the policy needs to be revamped, but I did my best, right?
All right. And then Aaron asked about key management and lifecycle. That one's kind of tough because I actually knew people that had like RSA keys, uh,
Mhm.
and they just kind of like drug them along with them from place to place to place until they stopped working because the default configuration for SSH didn't work anymore with them. Um, but that's something that you
I
can set in the SSH config. So
I
if
may be
somebody,
guilty of that.
yeah, yeah. If somebody is using something super old, you can just disable it, and then they can't use something super old because you don't allow that to be one of your authentication methods anymore. Um,
Right.
so
Yeah,
that's
what I do is I take whatever the current standard is for an SSH key and I go up a couple levels and that's what I make my SSH key and that way it lasts forever.
Dez key now. Is that it, Nate?
Yeah, yeah, right. I'm gonna have to find a quantum secure SSH key algorithm and make my new key with that.
On post quantum cryptography. Um, yeah. So I mean, as long as there are keys, so Aaron added some additional context that keys that are in place are 10 years old. As long as they are um, an adequate encryption cipher,
Hmm.
that's fine. I think the bigger thing is if you start changing it, you'll find out really quick that somebody has it and it doesn't work anymore, and then they'll start yelling. But that's an easily
Yeah.
changeable SSHD config thing. So you could issue new keys and get them copied wherever they need to be and test them out, and then go into SSHD config and remove the older cipher.
Hmm.
And if somebody's using it, you will find out very quickly.
Yeah. And
Um,
if it's not necessarily a cipher you're trying to protect against, the only other thing that rotating keys really protects against is a lost key, right? So if my laptop was stolen, or if I had my key on a thumb drive so that I could plug it into another machine, or if I used it on another machine and forgot to delete it, right? That's the sort of thing that forced rotation of keys can help protect against. If you don't know that your key is in the wild. However, setting a password on that key is exactly what that's supposed to help protect. If I left my key somewhere and there's a good password on it, it makes it a lot harder for someone to take and use without my knowledge.
yeah, and I think the SSH parlance is passphrase.
Sorry,
Um,
passphrase.
because essentially that's a key or a piece of data that you type in that will then unencrypt the encrypted key to then
Right,
present half where you're going.
right, and
Um,
that's all local. That's not an exchange of a password up to the server. That's between you and your key.
yeah, right. And so that actually ends up storing your key encrypted, which is why it prompts you for the passphrase so that it can be unencrypted to then be presented as a credential when you're going somewhere. And so
Right.
that's just kind of keeping it encrypted at rest if you have a passphrase set on your key. All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so we're just going to here we are.
Yeah.
Couple of programming notes. Nate mentioned earlier Summit. So we will be at Red Hat Summit. And next week is the craziest week of our years because it's the week before Summit. And so all the emergencies come out that aren't really emergencies, but were poor planning on someone else's part. But we get to deal
I'm
with
not
it.
tense. Are you tense?
Uh, I think, but so we won't be doing a show next week because it's like we want to make sure that we have enough room in our schedules that when those things inevitably happen, we can handle it and not do a terrible episode on Friday, which we try to not do that.
A terrible
Um,
episode could be entertaining, though.
I mean, we have one. It's called Sudo, and we often refer to it because of how terrible it was. Um, so we will be going to Summit, which means next week we're keeping the decks clear so that we can handle urgent requests, and
Right.
then the week after that we'll be at Summit.
Yep.
So we won't do again for a couple of weeks until we clear the Summit hurdle. But when we come back from Summit, we're going to talk disk elevators. And I mentioned that last week too, but for sure, when we come back from Summit, it's going to be disk elevators. So, what disk scheduling algorithm do you choose? What are the available tunables for it? and why would you pick it over something else? That's what we're going to be covering when we come back from Summit. If you're interested in Summit, the keynotes will be streaming live on the Red Hat YouTube channel, not RHEL, but Red Hat YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see the live keynotes if you so choose, including some RHEL product demonstrations on the day 2 keynote that I've been working on the last couple of weeks. So there you go.
Should be good
Summit.
stuff. We're going to have some pretty neat product announcements around RHEL that we are obligated not to talk to or not to talk about yet. So after Summit, we may have some cool things to talk about.
I mean, you could talk about it, Nate, but then Susan would have to like hunt you down and murder you
And
and
then
redact.
maybe we'd be going through the user deletion procedure for my Red Hat account, which would not be a place I want to be.
You divulge the RHEL 10 things. So.
All right. So, yeah, if your guys are coming to Summit, we absolutely want to hear from you. So come out and visit us. If you liked this episode, don't just hit the like button, but let us know that you liked this concept for an episode, right? This whole like planning and documentation thing. Because we have some other ideas on what else we could do. But if nobody's interested in it, then we obviously don't want to make the content. So let us know, right? Do you like the idea of us trying to help you make policies like this or whatever? We can try to come up with some more.
All right, everybody. Until next time.
Have a great one.